So here's our demo topology that we're going to be working with today. So I've got 3 Apic controllers, and you can see they're kind of connected to a bunch of different leaf switches. I've got a total of 6 leaf switches, and I've got a total of 4 spine switches. So all the connectivity between my leaves and my spines and my Apex has already been connected. This is like a day one. I've just turned on the power. So short, the only other thing I've configured is on my Apex is I have them configured with a SIM-CIP, which is that 172.16.176.177. And really that's just to give me access to the console of the Apic controller. The address you see above that, which is for Apic 1, it ends in 176, that's what I'm going to assign for a management address for that particular Apic. Okay, and correspondingly, you can see what I've got planned for Apic 2 and 3. So building out your topology like this and having a network diagram is very useful for planning your deployment when you're going to configure things. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into here and we're going to configure Apic 1. We're going to start off here, get it connected, get it configured, and we're going to discover the rest of our topology here. So we're going to jump over and switch gears here. So give me a sec while I switch. While I'm doing that, Mike, did you want to reiterate or ask any questions at this point?
Yeah, Rob, we had a couple of good questions. I'm in the process of answering another one, and there's a couple more backed up. Rest assured, if I don't get to your question right away, I am in the process of answering it. Let me go back to, you took away my screen.
Oh, do you need me to bring up a certain slide?
No, go ahead. I'm going to.
If you hover over the little pop-up there, Mike, where it says Viewing Robert Burns Desktop.
Yeah, I can go back to.
Yeah, drop down. Oh, and then you got to go over to Options to get the Q&A.
Yeah, give me a second, and I'll get back there. Q&A. Okay, so there's some questions around the IP addresses about the 10 infrastructure subnet that you talked about, the overlay. What are the VTAPs used for? What are SVIs? That type of stuff. Let's see what else. There's some questions on the Apex. Just to level set, the Apex are not something that you buy your own server and load this firmware on. These are pre-configured devices. They come as appliances from Cisco or from the partner. They are branded as Apex. They have special chips in them. If you attempt to load the software on something that does not have the correct hardware configuration, it will not load. There's an encryption module in there, so it's not something you can just buy a UCS server and manually create your own Apic. It is something that you would buy as a whole unit.
That's a good point.
Yeah. See, somebody asked about FIs. We do support FI connection to the fabric, but once again, those will be for user endpoints, not for Apex. Apex will be C-Series UCS platforms, once again rebranded specifically as Apex. They must be directly connected to the front panel port on those leaf switches. We do require the LLDP, as Rob mentioned, for the Apex to discover what they're physically connected to between the Apex and the front end ports of the leaf, because once again, LLDP is a point-to-point protocol, so we do have to run that straight from the NIC card in the Apex to directly plugged into the front panel port on the leaf. Is Apic Linux based? Yes, it's built on CentOS. So what else? That's pretty much it. Like I said, there's some additional questions that I haven't got to yet. The maximum of Apic devices, I believe, is going to be 16. I think that most fabrics, even the largest fabrics we have today, are running on 3, and there's no problem on them. Do I need to know ISIS? No. All the ISIS configuration and tuning is done a few under the covers automatically. In fact, the external routing protocols, we can't even connect to an external ISIS routing domain. We keep that all separate under the covers. Very similar to Fabric Path, if anybody's familiar with Fabric Path. Similar, but not obviously a lot more robust. That's it, Rob. I'll let you go ahead and continue on with your demo, and I'll continue to answer these questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And great questions. Really appreciate them. A lot of good questions coming in there. So what I've done here, if you weren't watching, is I pretty much just logged into my CIMC controller of Apic number 1, and I've brought up here the KVM console. So this is the actual screen. As soon as I powered it on for the very first time, this is what I'm going to see here. So it's asking me, I got to give my fabric a name. So I can keep the default ACI Fabric 1. You can call it whatever you want, really. So I'm just going to keep the default. Now it's going to ask me how many controllers am I anticipating in my fabric. Now there's no problem with growing it. So I could start at 1 and I could grow it, eventually. So some people start off in a lab environment where they only use one Apic, but then they may want to move that to production and then grow and add a couple more Apics for redundancy. Now I know I've got 3 controllers. I'm going to go ahead and go with 3. Now what's this particular Apic controller going to be? This is my Apic number 1. I'm going to give him ID number 1. Now the name, again, I can set whatever host name I like. I like the name Apic 1, nice and simple, so I'm going to go ahead and keep that. So here's where it's going to ask me now for the TEP address pool. So like I said, if you're using this 10/subnet elsewhere in your production network, it's a good idea to change it. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to a /11/16, just because we are using that. We just don't want to confuse it. When we get into extending the virtual leaf nodes, this will come into play. So I'm just going to keep it nice and safe. Now it's going to ask me for the infrastructure VLAN. So when I'm communicating, my control information between my fabric nodes or between virtual tunnel endpoints, I need a VLAN ID to encapsulate that traffic. So this will be kind of my control type traffic. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 4093. That's just the one I decided to use in my instance here. Now it's going to ask me for a couple of multicast address pools as well. I'm going to go ahead and keep the default, assuming, again, you're not using these. And then lastly, it's going to ask me for my management IP. So for this particular Apec, I've already kind of pre-allocated. I know I want to give him for an address. All right, going to be a /24 in this instance. It's going to want a gateway. And there we go. And it's going to ask me for interface speed for the management interface. Specific need for it. Do you want to enforce strong passwords? So that's something we recommend. You don't have to, but I'm going to go ahead and put in my strong password. I'm going to confirm it so I get it correct. Okay. Gives you a review of your configuration and asks, do you want to edit anything? So I'm very happy with my my configuration. Now, very important warning here, and we've just added this warning in. The TEP address pool, the VLAN ID for the infrastructure VLAN cannot be changed. So if you think, well, I'll just put it as VLAN 1 for now and I'll worry about it later, don't. Okay, you've got to get this right from the beginning because we can't change that on the fly. You'd have to pretty much rebuild the fabric, which is a bit of a pain. So make sure you put some thought into it, do your research to make sure that your address pool range and the VLAN ID and your multicast address pool are definitely not being used elsewhere, because we cannot change those. So after I finish that off, it's going to finish booting up the CentOS image that we've got the Apic software running on. So I'm going to go ahead and let that finish booting up. Now what I'll do from here is I will eventually then open up a browser to the Apic's management IP that I just configured. That'll come online and I should be able to log in. Now if I were to just open up a console, let's just say I'm going to connect to leaf number 2. All right, I'm just going to make this bigger so everybody can see it. Let's go nice and big. This is my leaf 2 console. So you can see that, I've got a login here. It's got no name. How do I log into it? Well, I don't have to yet because I haven't actually added it to my fabric. So I don't have any account or username yet assigned to it. So the nice thing about ACI is I don't have to configure this on each individual switch. They get discovered via LLVP, and I can go in here and these will be automatically added to my fabric. Now, if there was a problem with discovery where I don't know, well, is my LLVP working, we do have some special user accounts that you can use to get into the device. Let me see if one of the older ones. I'll come back to this in a sec here. I've got my Apic online here. So my Apic controller is good on the SymC. I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. I don't really need it because I'm going to go through the UI now. So I'm going to go back to my browser and go to the address that I just assigned to my Apic, which is 176. So by default, we require HTTPS. You can turn that off if you want to. You can even redirect if you prefer, so you can require that. You can try and connect to port 80, but we're going to redirect you. So you have to accept all the certs, give your fabric a center. Okay, so my admin account, and I'm going to go ahead and put in that address that I assigned and the username and password that I assigned. Now, it does take a couple seconds. If I try to log into the user interface immediately, a lot of times it's not going to work. It's going to take a while for that user database to finish booting that CentOS. So I do suggest give it about 2 or 3 minutes before you try and log in, or just retry. Okay, so here I'm in my UI. I got a nice fabric view here of where my system is. I don't have much I can see right now. See, I've got one Apec. He's healthy, but that's all there is right now. Okay, so I got to bring in my fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and do my fabric discovery. Now, there's a lot of terms you're going to see on the screen here, tenants and VM networking. In subsequent sessions, we'll dive deeper into the actual policy model and what all these various objects are. But for today, all we're trying to do is get the basic fabric online and ready to go. So if I come into my fabric tab at the very top here, into my inventory, if I expand my fabric membership, well, look at that. I do see a switch. Now, looking at my topology, if I look at that particular switch, that happens to be leaf number 8. So my Apec number 1, and I'm actually going to bring up my topology back up here again. All right. My Apec 1 here is connected to leaf 2 and leaf 6. So leaf 6 here, it ends in 3JO. And if I go back to the serial number in my Apec, 3JO. So that's why I say it's kind of important to know the serial numbers of your various leafs, because I'm going to call this guy leaf 6. That's that guy there. I know he's connected. I know which rack he's in. So I want to make sure I've got everything straightened away and I keep my names all correct in my head. So the two links are going to kind of work in an active-passive capacity. If I lost that link from Apec 1 to leaf 6, the leaf 2 would pick up immediately. So they are bonded in an active-passive manner. So all I can see is leaf 6. And the reason why is because that's really all I haven't seen or discovered anything else. So the first things I have to do, like we said, is I have to give it a node ID. So if I double-click on the row here, I know this is my guy. Now, I said that this was going to be leaf number 6. So for my naming convention, I'm going to use node number 106. For the node name, I'm going to call it very simply leaf 6. Now, I can put a rack name if you wanted to. I could put in a name here if I had a rack identifier, but it's not mandatory. So these two are the most critical pieces. I need my node ID, I need my node name, and I'm going to click Update. Now, keep an eye here on this IP. As we discover it, you're going to see the Apec hand out an address from that 11/16 address pool that we defined. I know its role is going to be a leaf. Okay, this is the model, and it's actually connected to a leaf node, not a spine. So again, all of your nodes, all of your endpoints are going to connect only to leaf devices. So what's happening in the background now is this particular leaf is doing a DHCP, hits my Apec, comes back, gives them an address. Now the process starts all over again. Now this leaf is looking at all the spines that he can see using LDP. So if you see here, I got 4 spines that just popped up and detected via LDP. I didn't have to go and configure those at all. So far, I haven't touched anything but my Apec. So they're detected, but they're not part of my fabric yet. So again, I'm going to go to my diagram. I'm looking at the serial number, which ends in 0AK. And if I come back to my diagram here, I know that, 0AK, that's going to be spine number 1. So let me go ahead and get him configured. Now, being a spine, I'm going to start at 200 and go up from there. So it's going to be spine number 1, so I'm going to give it the node ID of 201. For the name, I'm just going to call it spine 1, give it an update. All right, I'm going to do the next one. So I've got a cheat sheet right beside me here, and I know that this guy here, this 181, is actually spine number 2, so I'm going to give it ID 202, and it has to be unique. You cannot repeat any node IDs or else you'll get a fault. Now, as I'm doing this, now those spines are doing LVP, and they're going to say, hey, now I can see a bunch of other switches as well. I'm going to see all the leaf switches that aren't going to be leaf 106. I should see eventually 101, 102, 103 leafs pop up here. Let me just finish the last discovery of these guys. So N5K, this is going to be node number 3, spine 3. And again, I only do this once. This is not something I have to do recurring. And last guy here, this N64 one, this is going to be my last spine, 204, spine -4. So as I'm doing this, you can see my topology is building itself essentially.